Ron Paul not winning the GOP nomination is not stopping his supporters from taking the establishment on once again, this time with litigation. They call themselves Lawyers for Ron Paul, and they're a group unaffiliated with the official campaign. Their beef? The fact that bound delegates will have to vote for Romney instead of their conscience, simply because their states voted that way. To explain more about the lawsuit and what it all means, I'm joined by Austin Petersen, Director of Production for FreedomWorks.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Austin. So break down this lawsuit really quickly and the whole unbound, bound delegate thing for everyone.
Sure, absolutely. I should preface it by saying that I'm not a lawyer, but I have read over the details of the case. And it does appear that what they're trying to do is to prove that the delegates are not actually bound by federal law to vote for any specific candidate. The only problem with this is that the Republican Party is a private organization, which means that there can be punishments for not obeying party rules. Delegates who have chosen to become selected to the National Convention do have to follow their state election rules for their party, or they do risk facing possibly being kicked out of the party or being replaced with an alternate delegate. So the difference here is what happens between federal law and what happens between a private party. So Paul delegates will have to make a decision if they do vote for Ron Paul against the rules of their party. So for example, let's say they came from a state that said that they had to vote for whoever the winner of that caucus or primary was. If the state was a Romney state, if they chose to break the rules of that party and to vote against their party rules, they would not be subject to any federal laws or state laws. They would not be subject to any sort of a prison time, but they might be subject to a fine or being kicked out of their state parties, which would be bad for some delegates because Ron Paul's strategy was to infiltrate the GOP. So if their goal is to stay within the GOP, then they will have to make a really tough decision about what they want to do.
Austin, thanks for explaining that. Go a little bit into the voting rights violations and also the harassment that a lot of Ron Paul delegates have incurred over the course of this whole process.
Well, there's been a lot of harassment that's gone on, and that's also just basic politics. It happens in every state. There's lots of instances where Paul delegates that were disenfranchised. I think there was an example in Louisiana where they were actually they were pushed out of a meeting and they were forced to go on the outside and to hold their delegate meeting in a parking lot. So there was also another example where a Paul delegate was punched in the back of the head because they were supposedly being disruptive. So there's been all sorts of violence, but if you do look at things in the grand scheme of things, although it's been really bad, if you look at other countries like Korea, the Koreas, and some other countries, they do have a lot of violence. So we're very lucky, I think, that we have as little violence as we do. Our politics are relatively bloodless. So it has been bad. There has been a lot of disenfranchisement, and I do feel badly for the Paul supporters that had that. But it doesn't surprise me that the Romney delegates would be like that. That's just what the establishment totalitarian, viewpoint is. That's what they do. They intimidate and they harass. That's their job, and that's what they see as their prerogative.
So, Austin, you're talking about the harassment that Ron Paul delegates have incurred since this process, but also there have been voting fraud. There has been voting fraud that people have talked about, and also that's a segment of what this lawsuit's about.
Yes, absolutely, and I do want that prosecuted to the fullest extent that it can be. Voter fraud occurs in almost every election. It's how a lot of politicians do get elected. One of our biggest presidents, Lyndon Baines Johnson, was elected to the Senate based on voter fraud. It occurs in every single election. I'd like it to stop. I don't think it ever will stop. I think our voting system encourages fraud. It's part of how democracy works. I think there was a famous person who said once that it doesn't matter it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes. So I would like to see voter fraud prosecuted. I don't think that it's the kind of thing that could ever be fully eradicated. I just don't think there's any sort of system that could ever be devised that would be totally, foolproof. And that's why our founders didn't even really like democracy for the most part. As a matter of fact, a lot of the institutions of the United States are anti-democratic for that reason. I think the founding fathers of the United States didn't like democracy, which is why they created a Republican form of government and a court system that is anti-democratic. So we as libertarians shouldn't necessarily look to democracy as the end-all be-all. I would like to see less voter fraud, but I think we also need to look at other options for advancing our goals and causes.
It is interesting that a lot of people don't realize that this country is a constitutional republic, and that's what it was founded on. Austin, I wanted to go back to 2008 when a Utah delegate wanted to vote for Mitt Romney instead of McCain. And when he deferred to the RNC Council, this is what they said. They said the RNC does not recognize a state's binding of national delegates, but considers each delegate a free agent who can vote for whoever they choose. The National Convention allows delegates to vote for the individual of their choice, regardless of the person's name is officially placed in a nomination or not. Do you think that this ruling or statement will have anything to do with this case?
It could, absolutely, but the only problem is that the RNC can change rules as they see fit for the most part. You know, the problem with, again, the problem with democracy and the problem with private parties is that the private party can come in and have a meeting and hold a vote with the executive committee to change that rule, and they can do it in the 2012 National Convention, and that would negate what happened in 2008. I'm all for hope, you know, and having optimism, but I'm not sure that, you know, this lawsuit is necessarily going to change the outcome. I think some Ron Paul supporters think that this might be, you know, used in some way to give Paul the nomination, and as optimistic as I like to be, I don't think that that's realistic. I'd like to see that happen, but I think that if we can at the very least get some of our voting laws changed so that it's a more fair system, rather than trying to go for some unrealistic goal, it would be, you know, good in itself. But I would not hold out hope that that would actually happen. And again, I'm not a lawyer, and I am a Ron Paul supporter. I hope that he does well, and this lawsuit seems to have merit, and I think its goals do have merit as well. But I don't believe that that decision that occurred in 2008 is going to give any standing. It's going to have any standing because the RNC, the Republican Party, is a private party. They can do whatever they want, and they can nominate whoever they want, and they don't even really have to have elections.
It does seem symbolic at this point, Austin. I wanted to play you a quick clip from the video explaining the lawsuit in detail.
Okay.
Shouldn't we wait and give our state GOP party another chance to correct their misconduct? No. We urgently need your immediate support to help us document testimonies as evidence in support of our case. More witnesses, plaintiffs, and evidence will build a stronger case and result in more protection for us all. There's no reason whatsoever to expect the RNC or state GOP parties to comply with the law after they've openly threatened and injured Ron Paul Republican delegates. Expecting fair treatment without enforcing the law amounts to insanity.
So this video is basically saying don't expect the GOP or state RNC to, you know, do anything abiding by the laws, and the fact that they have disenfranchised Ron Paul delegates for so long. Why are the Ron Paul supporters still trying to work within this system that will continue to disenfranchise libertarians and his supporters?
Well, that's a really good question, and a lot of libertarians say that they shouldn't be. We're trying to work within the system. Some libertarians are saying it's time to go third party. Some libertarians are saying that it's not time to vote. This is a very dark day. These are very dark times for libertarians, and it's very hard for us to decide what to do. I mean, at the moment, it does feel as if we're sort of fracturing into these groups. And I want everybody to get together, but I don't think that it's going to happen in the short term. Now, whether or not these delegates want to, you know, coalesce behind Mitt Romney, that's up to them. I'm personally not going to be, you know, getting on board that train anytime soon. I've said the only way that I could ever support Mitt Romney is if he had a Rand Paul on his ticket along with a Judge Napolitano as the Attorney General, and audit the Fed, and a firing of Bernanke. And there is a bit of a hypocrisy, I think, in asking the government to come in and solve a problem when libertarians are saying we don't need the government to solve our problems. It is sort of a catch-22 because we're already in the system, so we have to work within the system. And I do applaud these lawyers for their actions in trying to hold the Republican Party accountable, but it does present a difficult situation if some of these Ron Paul supporters are trying to work within the system, and the Republican National Convention might actually accept these Ron Paul delegates and give them the leadership positions that they want and make the platform decisions that they want and possibly give the concessions that some of these Ron Paul delegates want. And if they're seen as belligerent, if they're seen as taking on the establishment rather than coming in and taking over, then it might be detrimental to them. But again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't comment on to whether or not this case itself has merit. I can only say...
Sure, but let's talk really quickly about what you just said, that you would support Mitt Romney if he had, did you say Ron Paul or Rand Paul as a VP?
Well, Ron or Rand, either one would be excellent.
What do you think about Rand's current endorsement of him, and do you think that he might be vying for VP candidacy there?
No, I don't think that he's vying for the VP candidacy, but I do think that Rand Paul endorsing Romney, although, you know, it didn't make me necessarily happy, is a good move in the short term because it's going to help him to accomplish some libertarian goals in the shorter term and the longer term. See, Republican Party politics is dirty. But Republican Party politics means that you have to go along to get along in some cases. So Ron Paul himself has endorsed some candidates who are not libertarian. He's endorsed some candidates that you could say are positive statist. So I would not say that an endorsement is necessarily saying this guy is my guy through thick or thin. It may be that he's enacting something that they call Fabian strategy, which if you look into your history, Fabian strategy means that you have to sometimes give ground in the short term in order to fight a larger battle because you're fighting a large...
Right. A lot of people say he's doing the long strategy and you know, that he's going to try to do more things later. But, you know, he is going out there and saying he's not only endorsing him, but he will campaign for him. But thanks so much for coming on. We're out of time, but that was Austin Petersen, Director of Production for FreedomWorks.